Hey guys, welcome back to the Minijet YouTube channel. Today's episode 5 of our CUB build series, and in this video, we're going to be going through the process of installing the UHMW plastic bottom or skid plate onto the bottom of our boat. Now, even if you've got one of our other models or a different hull from another brand altogether, you'll be able to follow the same steps to get the perfect UHMW installation. All right, so let's get started. So this is the plastic bottom that we put on most of our boats. Comes standard on the CUB, optional extra on a lot of the others, but it is probably one of our most popular options. So this 1/2-inch sheet of plastic is going to be going and covering most of the bottom of this boat, basically all of it up until the point that these guys end somewhere around there. So what's the procedure for this?
One thing to note was some of these welds, if they're a little bit proud, you need to get those little flushers so that the plastic can nicely cross that without lifting up on top of the weld. And then, yeah, blending the front of the intake like you said. So that's kind of the little weld preps you got to do. For you at home, you'll want a large piece of paper to create a template to cut the plastic out. If this was a blank sheet of paper, you would lay it on, and I like to use like a carpenter's pencil with the edge sharpened flat, so it's kind of like a big marking surface. And then you can trace all your edges on. You can trace on the cut that you'll need to do at the bow here. You can see that's it's kind of like a big V cut that needs to happen. And then same thing back here. You can trace around the intake and get a nice tight fit there.
And so on this A211 or CUB, we're going for 3 pieces of UHMW that'll all be stacked side by side.
Yeah.
So this is going to be our centerpiece, and the centerpiece just goes from the outside of each of the strakes on either side and encompasses the intake, like Ben was talking about, goes over the delta pad and has this front cutout. Mm-hmm. Then we've got our side pieces.
Yeah, the same idea with the template.
And so this guy butts up right on the outside of those strakes, all the way extending past these chine caps. So they'll come out just to be flush with this edge right here. So in terms of creating a template for yourself, mm-hmm. I guess the real kind of key things are obviously the overall width that you're looking for in the piece of UHMW when you're marking it, as well as kind of identifying where all these little features are underneath. So making sure you know where your strake and chine is going to line up. Mm-hmm. And I guess most critically, your fastening locations.
Yeah, so in order to kind of map that out, I like all these red lines here are actually the stringers, the box stringers that are inside the boat. And then some of these other lines are just optional center stringers that you want to avoid putting a bolt through by accident. So those are like the no-go zones. And then basically I just lay out a pattern of where you want your bolts to end up. So we do 4 inches spacing down the side of the intake, and then 2 inches along the front. This is a critical point where the boat ends up taking a lot of hits. So you want that plastic to stay down tight so that the water always flows in nice, so you don't have any cavitation issues. Along the center, it's kind of the bolts wrap over the 2 bends that create the delta pad. And that actually allows, these outer ones are outside the bend, so it allows the plastic to fold down. So we start by doing around the intake and then up the delta pad, and that allows us to form the plastic without actually putting it in a press brake. Just use the bolts to flex it around the hull. Yeah, we do 6-inch spacing along the strakes and along the chines out here. And then 4-inch spacing up along the bow seam here as well. And then this is 10-inch spacing. So this area is protected by the strake pretty well. So we, just to save weight and time, can space those out a little wider there.
One more important thing to note, I guess, is where you have your box section stringers, it's going to be very important that you're trying to locate those fasteners inside those little pockets.
Yeah, you want that mapped out so that those bolts go right in the middle of those rectangular pockets, so it's easy to get your washer and your nut on there.
The easiest way, I guess, to locate your stringer is either using kind of these welding burn-in marks. You can kind of see all the way up the bottom of the boat, and they kind of terminate here You can see that, so you can probably use that to locate, or you can measure off the inside. You'll have to measure off the inside, I guess, to get those pocket locations, either way, but
it's worth it to make the template, and you'll have a better outcome in the end.
cool. So for this process, we're going to be using 1 sheet of UHMW.
Yeah, 4x10.
To get the bottom of this boat done. For cutting UHMW, we like to use, what is it?
We like to use, it's a specialty blade, which you don't necessarily need to use, but it's for cutting composite decking, like for your deck behind your house. And it just has a deeper gullet here so that it can build up a little bit more chips before it plugs up.
Okay.
And this works really well.
And I know I've kind of overheard that we like to use brand new blades all the time, because I guess even if they're a little bit dull, it really diminishes the efficiency of the cut.
Yeah. We want to keep a sharp tool. If it is dull, the blade tends to heat up and warp, and it turns into like a big saucer shape basically, and it binds and it does not cut well. So sharp tools are important.
Nice. Okay. I guess we'll get to cutting out UHMW.
Yeah. The next step will be moving these templates over on top of this, marking all the cuts, and then use a center punch to mark all the hole locations.
All right, so Ben's got this first piece of UHMW cut out. So this is the middle section. As you guys can see, it's laid over the boat. And now Ben cut this with the templates, and you can see the fit up is pretty perfect. So you're really not going to be able to beat doing it that way once you've kind of nailed the templating system. So there's a couple, I guess, special chamfers that you've done that aren't on the templates. So
we cut a 45 degree on the front edge. Just set your saw to 45, so you have a nice kind of lead in wherever it touches the hull.
Nice.
And then back here around the intake, in order to not grind any of this weld off and leave all the strength, you can see that there, another 45 degree chamfer, not quite all the way, but just enough to clear the weld and allow it to sit flat. So this piece is ready to go on, and the way that it does go on, we're going to use these 5/16 countersunk Allen head bolts. So the procedure for installing those is drill the hole through all of our little center punch marks that we have there.
Right, and I guess
there. So only drill a few holes at a time, and then install the bolts, because the plastic can shift around. You don't want to like drill all your holes and then start running bolts in. So drill first. This is the tap drill size for a 5/16 18 thread pitch. Drill the hole first, and then we countersink to not quite all the way, but the majority of the size of the head of the bolt. Once you start to thread it in, that will suck it down, and it'll chamfer itself a little deeper. So chamfer and then tap, and then we run it in with an impact driver and an Allen head socket.
Okay. Now, I guess there are some kind of little details to be aware of when running the fasteners in. So the first thing you mentioned was countersinking. You don't want to countersink all the way, but you want to kind of let the bolt do the last bit of the work there.
Yeah.
And so I guess when they're fully installed, we want the fastener to sit just flush of the surface. Is that it?
Yeah, exactly. So that water flows over it nicely and doesn't get snagged on rocks if you are hitting rocks.
Okay. So I guess making sure that whenever your fasteners are installed, that they all sit completely flush with all of the metal edges sitting below the plastic.
Yeah.
And then the other thing, I guess, is with running these guys in, we like to start them with the impact, but finish, I guess, with a hand wrench.
Yeah, that way you can get a perfect depth setting. If you just impact them all in, there'll be some, it's hard to stop it at the exact moment to set the height. So by hand, you can get them all nice and equally just under flush.
Okay, perfect. And so we've also got two different sizes of fasteners here.
Yes.
And I guess on the template, we had kind of alluded to where some of these might go.
So to be clear, the tap is going through, you're tapping through the plastic and then into the aluminum. So the bolt, you're using the threads in the aluminum to suck the fastener down tight. And so in certain areas, mostly whenever there's a row of bolts running against the extrusion, either the strake or the chine, there's a bit more height here, and the bolt has to suck down and bend the plastic. So you need that extra length in order to actually grab the aluminum and start threading into it. So yeah, along here and along here, that's where we'll use the longer bolts.
Okay.
Yeah.
So shorter bolts are dominant, I guess, mostly through the delta pad and everything like that.
Yeah, and here any of the flat areas where the sheet is sitting nicely against the aluminum.
Use the shorter fastener.
Yeah.
Okay, so that covers fasteners from the outside, and then I guess when we get to it, we're also going to be putting sealing washers and nuts and anti-seize and all that on the inside.
Yeah, we'll cover that when we get there. And then as far as kind of where to start putting the bolts, my preference is to go around the intake first, and then along, do everything that's on the flat part of the delta pad. And then there's another set of bolts that we saw in the template that's just outside the delta pad. So those next ones will start to fold the sheet down and make it match the boat better. So yeah, delta pad next, and then after that we'll use the come along and suck these two tips together and run the bolts down the center of the bow. So that seam will be plastic welded, and then there'll be another two short seams right here that will be welded shut. But
yeah, I guess everything is obviously form fit to the boat. We're not gonna start welding anything before it's all sucked down and perfect there.
Yeah,
so.
Exactly.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right, so I guess we'll get to installing the centerpiece and then cutting out our two side pieces and essentially repeating the process there. So unfortunately, when we were filming the time lapse of the UHMW install, the camera decided it didn't want to cooperate and shut off just after Ben installed these first 3 bolts. Thankfully, we have some footage of when we did UHMW on our A212 shop boat, and the process is almost identical, with the only real differences being the template and the amount of screws that we use to install the plastic. So you can see here we've already got the center section installed and routed out nicely, but the process that you'll see us do to bolt on the outer pieces is the exact same thing as what we do for the center section. So just like for the middle piece, we're working our way from the center of the boat, the first few fasteners just to pin everything in place, and then following up by going down the line, drilling, chamfering, tapping, and then using the impact gun to install the fastener and start to pull the plastic down. After this, I'm just going down the line, tightening the fasteners the rest of the way by hand with a wrench, making sure that when I get to the front, I'm trying to tighten them all down at the same time, the same amount, to evenly pull the plastic down. Once all of the fasteners are installed, we can come back with the router and remove the excess material using the edge of the chine cap as our guide for our flush cut router bit. With all of that done, we finish the bulk of the work installing the plastic on the bottom side of the boat. All right, so it looks like we're just about wrapped up UHMW here on the bottom of this boat. I guess the bulk of the work is out of the way.
Yeah, it's all bolted on. So last couple steps, we're gonna go and fine tune the height of some of them. Like for example, this one's still a little proud. So just go back in with the hand ratchet and set those ones that are a little bit too tall. So we're gonna do that. It does happen where you'll strip the aluminum threads in the hull. You'll have to crawl inside the boat and put a nut and washer with some vice grips on it usually, or if you have a buddy, your buddy with a wrench, and then you can tighten it from the outside and bring the plastic down to the right height, flush to the boat. Yeah, so then that will set the height of all of our bolts for final.
And I guess on the topic of tightening bolts down, it's I guess a little bit easier if we all kind of like tighten these ones little by little, kind of going back and forth, as opposed to just, you know, sticking one down and the next down.
Yeah, so this outside edge, to kind of speed things up, once it's all fastened up here on this top edge, this outer edge you can drill and tap and chamfer all your holes, and then run the bolts in just loose so that the threads are all started, and then come back and tighten them all up. And if you don't start the threads and you tighten this one all the way down, it's going to misalign the hole on the one in front of that. So you want to get them at least all started so they're grabbing into the aluminum threads, and then run them all down. Yeah.
And I guess that helps with the deforming the plastic as well, because the load is kind of spread out and it all helps pull it down equally, as opposed to just, you know, one pulling down and then it all bunching up, making it really hard for the next one.
Yeah. Out on the chine edge, you're trying to actually form the plastic. So it'll be a smoother, less golf ball of a shape if you sneak them all up together. And then the last step here is we're gonna trim this excess off the edge. What I did is you can trim this edge after we had the center sheet on. It's just a lot easier when there's a bit of clearance here for the bearing on the router. And so all this is just a 1/2 inch flush cut, just a wood bit, nothing special. So we'll run that along the edges, give a perfect flush cut to the chine protection. And then at that point, we're going to prep to do the plastic welding. That entails opening mainly just this last section of the groove with a bit of a V bevel in order for the weld to have something to grab onto. Here, when I cut the side pieces, I left a gap, so these will just need a little bit of V-ing out, and then those will be ready to accept the weld as well.
So I guess, yeah, routering is the next step, and then it'll be on to weld, and
Yep.
after weld...
Yeah, we'll do the weld, and we'll just, there's a little bit of grinding cleanup to smooth it all out, and then after that's done, we'll be ready to flip the boat back over and install the nuts and washers inside. We'll cover that when we get there.
Okay, so the UHMW on the bottom of the boat is pretty much officially done now, I guess, eh, Ben?
Yeah, it is complete. So we back cut these open and pumped a big weld in there, and then ground it nice and flush. Ideally, that's the best case scenario to fill these cracks. If you don't have a plastic welder, not a lot of people do. Body shops have them a lot of times, or dump truck repair shops. They use the same material in the liners of dump trucks, so they would have it as well. Yeah, it's the best, most hydrodynamic finish. That's what we prefer to do. Alternatively, you could put like a 4, 5, 6 inch piece strip over top of the middle and bolt that on, segment the bolts between the other ones to double layer it there. The boat does take a lot of hits in this area, so that's definitely important. You could probably get away with leaving these uncovered. The water will flow over that pretty good regardless, so that's just the best case scenario for us to do.
Cool. And I mean, I guess having the plastic welder is pretty good, because in the lifetime of this boat, it'll probably take a couple hits, maybe open up some gashes in the plastic, and it's good for filling it back in. So
yeah.
Maybe not the best investment if you're just doing one boat, but if you're maybe planning to run 5 or 6 or start servicing them or whatever, it's a good tool to have.
Yeah, they are expensive, but it's the best thing for the job.
All right, so next step is going to be, I guess, flipping it over, throwing some nuts on the inside.
Yeah.
Well, we'll check back in when the boat's right side up then.
Sounds good.
All right, Ben, so the boat is flipped back over.
Yeah.
UHMW on the bottom is all done, but still some work left to do on the inside, eh?
Yeah, so we've got all the exposed threaded part of the bolts that we use to affix the plastic sticking through in here. So the procedure for locking those in place and sealing them up, so your 200 holes in your new boat don't leak. We use these, it's a rubber-backed stainless cone washer. So when that gets tightened down, the rubber gets squished into the aluminum hull plate and seals up the threaded hole. So our procedure for installing that, put the washer down first, and then at Minijet, all the hardware we use is stainless, the nuts, the washers, the bolts. So you need to use anti-seize or they will gall up and you'll be angry. So yeah, washer, anti-seize, and then stainless nylock. And then with this impact, it's going to be loud. Run it in until you just see the rubber squeeze out the edges slightly. So, see that? Yeah, so it's pretty much that. Rinse and repeat 200 odd times depending on the size of your boat. And after that, a little trick for speed that we like to do. We've got an old drive shaft that's got a clearance hole for 5/16 bolt in there. And that fits nicely over top, and then you just row that back and forth 2 or 3 times and it breaks it off nicely. So we'll do that with all the long ones that are sticking out like that, and then anything that's going to be close to the floor or exposed outside the floorboard, we'll go with the grinder and take the sharp edge off of it.
Okay, cool. So no actual like sealant compound or anything like that?
If you're on top of a weld a little bit, if you have a slightly misplaced bolt, you might want to add a dab of sealant just to help that rubber washer bridge the gap. But for the most part, as long as they're all on the flat hull plate, they should seal up without any extra sealant.
Okay, cool. All right, so now that the UHMW install is finished up, that's where we're gonna leave it for today. Now, I mentioned at the beginning of the video that the UHMW plastic is one of our most popular options for our boats, and it's standard on the Minijet CUB. Now, you may be wondering why. Well, At its most basic, the UHMW is extremely slippery. It has a very low coefficient of friction. This means that it'll slide over rocks, logs, sand much better than aluminum, which has a much higher coefficient of friction and would actually stop pretty quickly if you try to do the same thing. On top of this, the UHMW is a sacrificial layer on the bottom of the boat. If it ever gets too scraped up or cracked, it's easier to unbolt this and install a new one than having to repair the aluminum bottom of your hull. Finally, you may be wondering if it's really necessary to drill all the holes in the bottom of your boat, and the short answer is yes. As long as you're being diligent when you install the nuts and washers on the inside of your boat, the combination of those two and the tapped hole that we did in the bottom of the hull makes for an excellent watertight seal. It's very rare that we'll ever see leaks from these bolts, and if you do find one, it's usually as simple as using a wrench to tighten it down and the leak's gone. Because of the molecular structure, which is what makes the material as slippery as it is, we can't actually use any glue to chemically bond the UHMW to the bottom of the boat. Sometimes you'll see others using something called a weld washer to attach the UHMW, but generally we don't recommend this because they're more expensive, they're harder to install since they don't actually pull the plastic to the shape of the boat, and they're not as strong as using through bolts. All of this aims to solve the problem of not having fasteners on the bottom, which ultimately when they're installed correctly doesn't really have any major issues by themselves. Well, that's it for today's video. Make sure to leave a like if you enjoyed it and drop a comment letting us know what you thought. Make sure you subscribe to the Minijet YouTube channel so you're notified when the next video comes out, and see you then.